Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. So we semi-recently had Legion Remix, or Lemix as it was colloquially known. While I have plenty of criticisms about how it was just a dopamine treadmill shoveling rewards down your throat while you ran the same raids a billion times too quickly to even know what mechanics they had, the game mode did give me a great excuse to play through Legion's quests for the first time in years. In particular, the gem of that expansion, which is honestly saying a lot. Suramar has long been regarded as one of WoW's greatest questing feats, and I've little doubt it will retain that reputation far into the future. It had a lot going for it after all, not least of which was probably some extra time in the oven due to the development on WoD being abandoned early. But just what about it was so dang good that such a huge swath of the population can still reminisce on it so fondly? Well, simply put, it nailed everything. It gave us fantastic characters, a compelling plot, a gorgeous environment, and engaging gameplay. And there was also a secret fifth element that I'll cover as well, though it kind of permeates the other points, so it shouldn't come as that much of a surprise. To start things off, Suramar gave us a phenomenal cast of characters. First, let's look at the Shal'dorei culture as a whole. The Nightborn are my favorite race in the game. Their design is pretty much perfect to me, melding their Night Elven origins with a sleek magical aesthetic. Runic tattoos, glowing hands, elegant robes, regal postures, and of course, those low-hanging eyelids that carry with them a haughty sense of superiority. I adore how Nightborn, even the good guys we cooperate with, have a degree of snootiness to them. Even if they can acknowledge that the other races of the world are just as valid, nobody does it fancier than they do. And that's really all I could want out of an elf race. I want some sexy, snobbish French elves. Fun fact, Nightborn were originally going to have French accents, but they didn't run with it because they found it too off-putting. But basically everything that I love about Nightborn is what I love about Blood Elves. And while I think that Blood Elves are far more integral to WoW's lore, at a personal level, I just vibe with the Nightborn a little bit more. Of course, we cannot speak of the similarities between those two races without touching on the magic addiction. And I do love me some crackhead elves. It's great to see the levels of selfishness and depravity they're willing to go to in order to survive or to maintain their lifestyles that they've grown accustomed to, and how without their usual sources of energy, they physically degrade. Blood Elves into the Wretched, and Nightborn into the Nightfallen and then the Withered. The Nightfallen models are literally twitching and scratching at themselves. It's great. These fallen states of being quickly lead to a complete abandonment of their former decorum. Hard to be elegant when your mind is starting to go numb. But it is from these emaciated states that our heroes must crawl themselves out of and how we first meet them. Blizzard made the very prudent decision to focus their attention on a core trio of Nightborn. While we certainly get plenty of content outside of them, these three serve as the easily identifiable personalities that even casual observers can latch onto. Clearly, foremost among them is First Arcanist Thalyssra. As our leader, she naturally has the most rounded identity. Arguably the most basic, but that's okay to an extent. She loves her city and her people, and her stuff, and she is pissed that they've all been tainted and sacrificed for the sake of some alliance with the Legion. She is arguably the most capable magical combatant among our heroes, though that's not really the focus of her character. We also see that she tends to specialize in barriers and empathic probing rituals. She is overall very capable, but her true strength lies in her capacity to gather followers that she can trust in and delegate responsibilities to. Her two most trusted companions who round out the core trio are Chief Telemancer Oculith and Arcanist Valtrois. The former is probably many players' favorite, as he's got such an endearing disposition. Oculith specializes in telemancy, managing the Rebellion's portal network. There are a good handful of moments where he almost seems off his rocker or not in control of the situation, but he is unquestionably the top talent and authority when it comes to teleportation. So the goofy antics come across entirely as a quirk of his character and not through any actual ineptitude. He's definitely the easiest guy around to get along with. And completing the trio, we have Arcanist Valtrois, whose title is sadly a fair deal humbler than her companions. I mean, she's just an Arcanist, but Thalyssra is First Arcanist. That's not to say I think any less of her. Quite the contrary, Valtrois is my favorite Nightborn character, and one of my favorite characters overall. To me, she is the embodiment of what makes an ideal Shal'dorei. The whole time we quest with her, she manages to maintain a faint aura of superiority, calling us her assistant and having us do the menial labor. She isn't demeaning, but she knows her value and isn't going to downplay it to anyone she doesn't respect. And she is valuable, being the best there is when it comes to her area of expertise, ley lines. Her understanding of how they flow and can be tapped into and utilized is so great that even a blue drake like Stelagosa wound up having to respect her. And the quests with the two of them really were filled with delightful banter. Just two gals being pals, Aside from the main trio, there are two other members of the Resistance that warrant shoutouts, both of which managed to avoid exile, at least long enough to avoid withering at all. The first is Silgrin, an expert spell fencer and the de facto leader of the Nightfallen's military troops. He is incredibly dependable and always willing to do the groundwork of the Resistance. The other is Lilith Lunister, a prominent socialite who manages to rise to political power as our hero's eyes on the inside. You know she's trustworthy because the first thing you do is help her control her brother, and a Lunister always repays their debts. Both are quite likable characters, even if they don't quite get the same degree of spotlight. There are plenty of others as well. Vanthyr, who managed to covertly distribute the life-giving Arkwine to the suffering commoners of the city during Elisand's restrictions. Side note, it's just a delightful detail that the Nightborn artificially aged their wine using time magic chambers. Also Delini, the gondolier we can always count on. Arluin, the selfish rogue who actually has a heart of gold. Arluel, his sister, who he saved from fully withering and who resolves to honor his memory by joining the cause and studying under Silgrin. Veilwalker Faldorin, the Night Elf keeper of the Resistance's precious Arkandor, and so many others. Lastly, as far as the characters go, I want to touch on Grand Magistrix Elisand. After all, can't have a compelling story without a good villain, right? Well, for better or worse, Elisand doesn't get a ton of screen time. She and her cruel policies are often mentioned. We know that she was acting in a misguided attempt to save her people from eradication, but was willing to resort to such extremes as exile, creating a false Arkwine shortage, offering commoners to the Legion's soul engines, allowing Gul'dan access to the Eye of Aman'Thul, and keeping a gnome among her tower of concubines. So despite her supposed good intentions, she's clearly not a good person, whatever she may tell herself. I don't think Elisand is the deepest character in the world, evidenced by how she is only even the penultimate boss of her own raid, but she serves her purpose. And to her credit, she's got one of the best smack talk scenes we've ever gotten, throwing shade at Kaldurai, Queldurai, and Sindorai alike before freezing a huge chunk of the assault force in a time lock spell. Now that's how you tell a story involving all of the elven races, Blizzard. I only wish the Rendorai existed back then so that she could insult their whole existence. Alas. Of course, all the dope crackhead characters in the world don't mean much if you don't have a compelling narrative to utilize them in. And Suramar is, at its base, a pretty bog-standard WoW plot of the oppressed and virtuous members of a race resisting against the cruel and tyrannical rule of the current regime. Your basic rebellion story. It's been done a billion times before and no shortage of times in WoW. Heck, just looking at the War Within, it happened 3 separate times. First with Skitter and the Kobolds rebelling against the Candle King, then the Severed Threads Nerubians rebelling against Queen Ansarek, and then the various cartels of Undermined Goblins rebelling against Gallywix. Nobody's saying it's not overdone. Though to its credit, I don't really think it was overdone back during Legion's time. And more importantly, I don't think it's ever been done as well within WoW as Suramar. So yeah, we've got Thalystra and her Nightfallen rebelling against Elisand and her forces. Aside from the sheer groundwork that goes into telling this story, it has some interesting twists and turns throughout. Obviously, we start out at rock bottom. Thalystra and her crew attempted to stage a coup before Elisand could make her dark bargain, but were themselves betrayed by Melandris, the final boss of Court of Stars. Now exiled and withering, they need to pull themselves together from practically nothing. It does take a bit of luck, of course. It was admittedly quite fortunate for Thalystra to stumble upon an opportune base of operations like Shalaran. The one advantage they've truly got at this point is that they're off the radar. So long as they keep their noses down, they have a bit of freedom to get established. That isn't to say the pressure's off though. Withering remains a constant threat if their hunger is not sated. The longer Elisand remains unopposed, the tighter her grip on the city will become. And in the even bigger picture, Gul'dan is working to convert Illidan's husk into a vessel for Sargeras himself. At any rate, now extremely humbled, the Nightfallen get to work, taking anything they can get. By locating the research notes of the now withered Keldanath, we're able to come across Theron, a withered who is attracted to the inert Arkandor seed that ultimately proves to be the Nightborn's salvation. After releasing the seed, we are befriended by Veilwalker Faldorin, the seed's keeper who attempted to grow in Arkandor in the past and failed. leading to the creation of the Faldorai spider people. With the assistance of Keldanath's research, we're able to start amassing an army of Withered. At the same time, Oculith and Valtrois are hard at work establishing our portal network and connections to the ley lines. Through miscellaneous quests across the zone, we slowly start to bring more and more allies into Shalaran, and as this all happens, we also reach out to our friends still inside the city: Lilith Lunister, Silgrin, Vanthyr, and the like. It is at this point that we start to interact more directly with Elisand's forces, and thus face more consequences. We start out with some simple quests to help the oppressed citizens of the Waning Crescent, and things go mostly smoothly. Alarmingly though, the Arkandor is being harangued by dangerous insects, and we need a solution. Thus, we are sent to the vineyards, where we are assisted by the sympathetic Vinter Margot. Her gentle nature proves to be her doom though, and she is put down by a noble she briefly challenged. This is one of the first direct losses we face. With the help of the roguish informant Arluin, we're able to take vengeance for her, and in doing so, truly reveal the existence of the Dusk Lily's rebellion to Elisand's regime. We then aspire to more directly infiltrate Elisand's court, by helping Lilith achieve her advisor position. But wait, another crisis has emerged with the Arkandor. As it approaches maturity, it needs a massive influx of arcane energy, and the only way for us to do that is to infiltrate the Archway and cause a mana storm. Fortunately, we recently ran into Millhouse in the assault on Violet Hold. Okay, not that kind of mana storm. Thalysra herself ventures out for this task, along with Arluin, who winds up being our second major death when he sacrifices himself to ensure that both Thalysra and the tree make it through. Thankfully, everyone's efforts have ensured the survival of the Arkandor, and with it comes the precious fruit that grant a permanent cure to those who consume it. We give the fruit to our main trio, as well as to Arluin's withering sister, Arluel. This marks the end of the 7.0 quests. The Nightfallen have managed to establish a base, an army, a reputation, and a cure. Our friends' efforts have been overtly rewarded as they return to their healthier Nightborn forms. Though they are not yet ready to liberate the city, they've laid the foundation. The 7.1 Insurrection quests feature immediate escalation. Elisand cracks down hard on the Waning Crescent, which had served as our base of sorts within the city. We even lose access to our precious portal, which almost feels like as much of a loss as the characters themselves. Thankfully, we managed to set up another one to replace it. The following chapter has us liberate citizens who are being shipped off to serve as fuel for the Legion's soul engine. And after that, we discover that Vanthyr, the hero of the people of the Waning Crescent, has been captured and is to be made an example of. Thankfully, we managed to save him. At this point, the Kirintor, as well as the elven forces of both the Alliance and the Horde, establish a staging ground outside the city in preparation for their assault. Things are starting to look up. Unfortunately, despite the Arkandor saving the Nightborn from their addiction, it is not an entirely immediate solution. It can only produce fruit so quickly after all, and thus Valtrois travels to Azuna to tap into a bit of extra mana for the time being. Meanwhile, Oculith and Silgrin deal with the problems of an army devoid of practice and armaments by sending us to Blackrock Hold in Val'Sharah. The time is finally at hand. We've made all of the preparations necessary, and with our outside allies, we are able to cut a slice directly through the city, bringing us to the front gate of the Nighthold, at which point Elisand manages to trap a good chunk of our forces and leaders in a time lock spell. I'd call it a setback, but it's more of a pause button than a rewind. Things go from bad to worse when we discover that Lilith has been found out, and that's why she was unable to warn us about the time freeze, or inform us about the breach beneath the Nighthold that leads to the Nightwell, and which has been sealed off. Additionally, a new first Arcanist has been named, the Fellborn Anaris Narasin. While Valtrois focuses on breaking the seal by tampering with some of Suramar's ley lines, Thalysra goes herself to attempt to assist Lilith's estate, bringing their strongest Withered along, only for them to be decimated by the Fell. With a bit more experimentation, Thalysra is able to give the Withered a resistance to the Fell. In a stroke of poetic justice, these Withered, which came from the exiled dregs of the city, and which we began to befriend way back at the start of the campaign, are the key to draining Anaris of her Fell barrier and allowing us to put her down. The breach is in our hands now, and the final assault can begin. The raid itself is kind of outside the scope of this video, but the quick summary is we push our way upward, manage to free Lilith, slay Elisand, and defeat Gul'dan, though Illidan kind of gets to steal the thunder on that last point. I'll forgive it because it looks really cool. So overall, I'd say a very riveting campaign. We make lots of progress throughout, but there's enough back and forth to keep things interesting. There is work to be done, catastrophes to circumvent, losses to mourn, friends to save, and a city to take back. Simple as the premise may be, the execution was stellar. A briefer point that I need to touch on is just that the zone is absolutely gorgeous. Seriously, one of the best looking zones they've ever put together. The autumnal feeling orange and red sections of wilderness are so serene to chill out in. The city itself is of course absolutely stunning and massive, managing to feel considerably larger than even our faction's capital cities. And look, I'm not going to go into super intricate detail here, I'm sure I'll have more to say when I get to my Zones of Legion video, but this is seriously one of the prettiest areas in the game. Absolutely one of the most intricately put together. I mean, there's just so dang much to it. Heck, even the ruins and underground sections of the zone are beautiful. I do think the perpetual purple night scene would get tiring to live in, and the zone can feel a bit patchworky, and of course there's the intentionally ugly Felso Hold, but as a place to do a bunch of questing in, it completely nails it. We've still got a lot to cover though, so I'll leave it at that. The fourth major success of Suramar are the actual gameplay elements. I'm not gonna lie and say that there aren't an abundance of quests to kill X enemies and loot Y objects. Those are the bread and butter of the game after all, and there's nothing wrong with that. But thankfully, we do get enough to spice things up this time around. A very minor detail that just adds to the believability of it all is that until you finish the 7.0 campaign, you will periodically have to feed ancient mana to the main trio as they become too overcome by withdrawal symptoms to actually interact with otherwise. But aside from that little bit, I found the little puzzles given to us by Oculith and Beltrois to be fairly neat. The former has us navigate his cliffside teleporter pads, and the latter has us toggling different pillars to redirect ley line feeds so that we can disable the seals at the stations. These quests were just a nice change of pace. One of my favorite bonus activities in the game's history also came from this zone, Withered Army Training. Basically, you take a platoon of Withered into an instanced version of Falinar to see how far you can take them. Unless you were a tank and could trivialize much of the difficulty by simply holding threat on all enemies, this was a big ask at first. You had to increase your ancient mana cap so that you could start the run with more Withered. You had to learn with each attempt the safest way to navigate the halls. You had to make judgments about whether to keep your Withered around for more damage, or send them away with the permanent upgrade chests before they wind up dying and becoming useless to you anyway. You had to live with the panic of accidentally pulling too many mobs and seeing your army suddenly get depleted. You had to manage the anxiety of when the Leystalker Drow would pop out from nowhere and attempt to end your run on the spot. But thankfully, over time, you would get wiser, your army would get stronger, and the amount of Withered you have to sacrifice for chests becomes 0. Eventually, you get all of the rewards, and eventually, you manage to make it to the end of the tunnels without too much fuss. It was a very satisfying, gradual progression that certainly shook up the formula. And of course, it's impossible to talk about Suramar's gameplay without mentioning the sleuthing aspect of the city proper. We're basically playing Assassin's Creed here. Well, I'm not sure about that, I've never played Assassin's Creed, but it's probably in the ballpark. You have your masquerade disguise that lets you safely traverse the city, but with you needing to avoid any mobs with true sight circles around them. Seems simple enough, right? Well, it is, until things go horribly wrong. If you stumble into any of these circles and linger for a moment too long, your disguise poofs, and suddenly not just those mobs, but any normally hostile mobs nearby will all be on your butt in no time. And of course, there will always be times when you have to abandon your disguise to kill targets. Better hope you're in a safe spot, or cleared one out beforehand, if that was even possible. This was all fairly manageable in the western parts of the city, but get cranked up to 11 in the eastern half, where enemies are tougher and more tightly packed. Even if you took out the sleuthing element, parts of the city would still be challenging due to the regular issue of mob density. Inevitably, it happened to everyone. Oops, you were reckless or missed some detail, and now your fairly chill questing just turned into 20 elite mobs beating on your hind end as you attempt to run for your life, and maybe, if you're fortunate enough, drop combat long enough to heal up and try again. Though, just as often, your goal simply becomes to die in a place ideal enough for you to res nearby safely. It could be absurdly frustrating at times. You'll call it BS and get righteously pissed at the game. I certainly did, no shortage of times. But it's worth it. When you manage to slip in, do what you need to do, and get the heck out of Dodge, it feels amazing. And even if your experience winds up being on the bloodier end, at least you persevered enough to pull it off. Frustration in gaming is a curious thing. Too little, and things become boring. Too much, and you break your keyboard. But I don't think having some frustration as a present element is a bad thing whatsoever. But I also enjoyed questing in the Maw, so maybe I'm just crazy. Either way, one thing that you can't argue against is that the masquerade mechanic made things more interesting, and I believe it deserves praise for that, if nothing else. And so we come to the super duper special ingredient that takes all of these otherwise solid elements and ferments them into something truly rich and deep. That's right, I'm making an Arkwine pun here, because that special sauce is time. What made Suramar not just good, but great, was that it was a slow burn, and that is an element that unfortunately was completely absent from Lemix. The experience was completely different, with the only real upside being that being able to binge it all made it easier to remember the more minor characters. But by and large, things were better in the original. I know players hate hearing this, but time gating is a very valuable tool, especially in an MMORPG. And Suramar had a good deal of time gating to it. The 7.0 quests were all gated by reputation thresholds. After the initial batch, you had to improve your rep partway through Friendly, then to Honored, then partway through Honored, and partway through Revered. The 7.1 Insurrection quests required you first to be Exalted, and were themselves spread out over I think like 6 or so weeks. And let me tell you, reputation with the Nightfallen was not the completely free thing that it is nowadays. You had to work your way up slowly, either through world quests, rep tokens from the Withered Army training, or emissaries. And those emissaries only gave 750 rep, half of what you would get for any of the other Broken Isles reputations. Oh, and Withered Army training itself? Once every 3 days. Hope you don't completely botch your run. But the rep thresholds might not feel like the largest barrier in the world to you, considering just how many quests the zone actually had. I counted approximately 312 of them between the initial batch and the Insurrection quests. Compare that to Val'sharah, which is admittedly one of the shorter leveling zones of Legion, which had a mere 84. That's right, you could fit 3.7 Val'sharah's worths of questing into Suramar. And let's not pretend the quests go at the same pace either. You could plow through Val'sharah. You had to behave very cautiously for a lot of Suramar. It should go without saying, of course, that you were a lot weaker, relatively speaking, back when it was current content, than in Lemix, where you just overpower everything eventually. Another important element that slowed you down was that when this content was current, flying was not available. That wouldn't come until, I believe, 7.2 and the Broken Shore. Obviously, flying makes everything faster, but this is multiplicatively true in the city proper. Being able to mount up whenever you're out of combat, essentially reset yourself to a safe place, and then position yourself in an ideal spot for your next objective, saves buttloads of time and effort over needing to fight or navigate your way through a sea of elite mobs waiting to expose you. There's a reason an illusion, what are you hiding, became a meme. It wasn't because it's what you hear as you take off on your flying mount. It's because it often signaled either your death or a close call with it. I could go into a whole tirade about how flying can be detrimental, but that'll probably be its own video. Suffice to say that Suramar pre- and post-flight are absolute worlds apart. I think I've made it clear that Suramar was a slow burn, but why was that such a good thing? Well, first and foremost, immersion. We got a lot more attached to the characters when we spent months with them, compared to the few hours you might know a character in a typical zone. You get more invested. When Thalyssra and company finally ate their Arkandor fruits, it meant something because you'd put in weeks worth of blood and sweat with them. When the Nighthold is at last taken, it means something because you fought tooth and nail to get to that point. Shal'Aran itself is a great microcosm of this phenomenon. As you complete both the main campaign and side quests throughout the zone, you slowly start to populate the hub with the various NPCs that you'd quested for or otherwise assisted. The left side of the place literally starts to gradually fill up as you unlock more portals around the zone. One simple but charming bit of the Insurrection quests is that each week began with you passing out a fruit to another refugee. Because, yeah, trees don't just immediately spawn hundreds of fruit for everyone to eat at once. Aside from the characters, it helps add legitimacy to the rebellion. I think it stands in extremely stark contrast to the Reclamation of Gilneas, an event that could have felt similarly significant, but which took about 15 minutes of questing. One felt real, the other felt like hollowly checking something off a list. Shalaran developed gradually. Our army grew gradually. The story unfolded gradually. And the rebellion happened gradually. Some events should feel quick. Retaking a city from a powerful regime when you're starting out as a bunch of withdrawal-suffering outcasts should not feel quick. Even the zone itself benefits a little bit from things unfolding slowly. When you're questing out in the wilds, there's an insatiable curiosity about just what the heck is actually going on in the city. And once you're in the city, it's not like you see it all at once. What's with the entire eastern half that we've yet to see? Oh, it's even more terrifying. Good to know. At the end of the day, what makes Suramar such a delight to go through was simply that it always went the extra mile, which you can say about much of Legion. The characters were distinct and memorable, while also being likable. The storyline was fleshed out and had its emotional ups and downs. The zone was beautiful. The gameplay was unique and exploratory, and it was all allowed the time to breathe and embed itself permanently into the hearts of countless players who enjoyed it while current. I know the likelihood feels slim nowadays, but I hope we get more zones like this that break the mold in unexpected, daring ways, because sometimes it really pays off. This week's drawing was an easy choice for me. I had already drawn Thalyssra, the most prominent Nightborn, so instead I drew Valtrois, my favorite Nightborn. I already covered why she's absolutely fantastic earlier in the video, but basically, while she's of course a nice person, capable in her craft and dedicated to the cause, she always manages to maintain an aura of smug haughtiness. That's exactly what I love about the Nightborn, and pretty much one of my favorite character flaws from a pure enjoyment standpoint, at least when attached to fancy, sexy elves. Valtrois' design is very interesting because it would be extremely simple by WoW standards, if not for the giant gold disc thingies serving as her shoulder pads. And of course, I had to include the trademark Nightborn half-lidded condescending eyes. They're so good. And I stuck Valtrois in Court of Stars. I know she doesn't actually feature in that dungeon whatsoever, but I'd already drawn the Archway, I'd already drawn the Nighthold, and spoiler alert, I'm gonna draw the Suramar zone too. So yeah, it's pretty much the start of the dungeon where you're by the gondola docks. Overall, pretty satisfied with how it turned out. That wraps up this video though, so thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye.